At 3:11 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in mid-November, a notification appeared on three separate screens in the North Star Casino's back office, triggering a sequence of events that would eventually consume thousands of executive hours and fundamentally challenge how the establishment understood player behavior. The night shift manager, Marcus Chen, was drinking his fourth coffee of the evening when the payout approval request materialized on his monitor. He had been working overnight shifts for 11 years and had processed countless large payouts. High rollers walking away with six figures was standard operating procedure in a casino that catered to wealthy clientele from across three states. But this was different. $45,000. He checked the player ID associated with the request. No VIP designation, no whale status indicating a known high-value customer, no history of seven-figure plays, no special accommodations on file, just a standard player account, active for 23 months belonging to someone named Ryan Patrick Keller. Chen's first instinct was system error. The number had to be wrong, perhaps a misplaced decimal, perhaps a data entry mistake from a fatigued overnight cashier. He ran the verification sequence, expecting the system to flag the request as invalid. Every checkbox came back green. No flags, no violations, no suspicious activity patterns detected by the automated monitoring systems that tracked every bet placed on the floor. The transaction history showed a player who had accumulated winnings gradually, consistently, across hundreds of documented sessions. Every bet logged, every payout processed according to standard procedures. Chen ran the verification again, manually this time, checking transaction records dating back to Keller's first documented visit. The pattern was unusual but not impossible. A player who started small, played conservatively, and slowly built a bankroll over nearly 2 years of consistent play. At 3:16 a.m., following protocol and finding no legitimate reason to deny the request, Marcus Chen authorized the payout. $45,000 transferred to an external bank account linked to player ID NK47823. Within 6 hours, the approval would trigger an internal review that would consume the attention of senior executives, security directors, legal consultants, and external investigators specializing in advantage play detection. The investigation would analyze 847 hours of security footage across 1,247 individual gaming sessions. It would examine betting patterns, dealer interactions, timing analysis, and behavioral markers with forensic precision. And it would ultimately conclude with a finding that made everyone in the casino industry deeply uncomfortable. They had been legally, completely, undeniably outplayed by a 26-year-old broke night student who had treated their carefully engineered psychological trap like an exam he had been preparing for all year. No cheating, no collusion, no prohibited devices or methods. Just discipline, pattern recognition, and the absolute refusal to behave the way the system expected him to behave. Ryan Patrick Keller was 26 years old and unremarkable in every measurable way that society used to evaluate human potential. He attended evening classes at Riverside Community College, a sprawling institution of beige concrete buildings and cracked asphalt parking lots situated in the industrial corridor between the city proper and the suburban sprawl that had consumed former farmland during the housing boom of the previous decade. The college served a population of part-time students, career changers, and people for whom traditional four-year universities had been financially or academically inaccessible. Ryan arrived on campus at 6:30 p.m. every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, parking his 2008 Honda Civic. Silver exterior faded to a dull gray. Odometer reading 187,000 miles. A crack spider webbing across the passenger side of the windshield that he had been meaning to repair for 8 months. In the same spot in parking lot C, third row from the entrance. He had calculated this position provided optimal distance between his car and the business administration building while minimizing foot traffic exposure during winter rain and maximizing shade during summer heat. His backpack was military surplus, olive green canvas that had faded to something closer to institutional gray, held together with meticulously applied strips of duct tape. He had purchased it for $12 at a thrift store, and the tape wasn't decorative. It was structural engineering. Each strip had been cut to exact length and positioned to distribute stress across weakening fabric seams, according to principles he had read about in a materials science textbook he'd found at the library. He sat in the back row of every class, specifically in the third seat from the left when possible. This position provided unobstructed sightlines to whiteboards and projection screens, while minimizing the probability of being randomly selected for participation. Professors typically called on students in patterns, front row first, then sides, working backward only when front row hands weren't raised. The back center position allowed Ryan to observe without being observed. He never raised his hand, never asked questions during lectures, never participated in classroom discussions unless directly called upon, and even then, his responses were economical, accurate enough to demonstrate comprehension, brief enough to avoid follow-up inquiry. His physical presence was equally designed for invisibility. He wore the same rotation of clothing, 3 pairs of dark jeans purchased from Goodwill, 5 solid-color t-shirts in navy blue and dark gray, 2 button-up shirts for days when presentations were required, 1 jacket, a black windbreaker that served adequate purpose across 3 seasons, work boots that doubled for both his warehouse job and campus, eliminating the need for separate footwear. Everything selected for durability, affordability, and the absence of distinguishing features. When group projects were assigned, an inevitable feature of business courses designed to teach collaboration skills, Ryan was always selected last, chosen not through desire, but through mathematical necessity. 3-person groups would form organically, leaving him as the remainder. 4-person teams would coalesce around shared interests or establish friendships, and he would be added when the instructor insisted all students must participate. His contributions to these projects were executed with precision. He performed his assigned portion of work exactly as specified, submitted materials on time through shared documents that required no face-to-face interaction, and never suggested additional meetings beyond the minimum required. His groupmates quickly learned he was reliable but uninteresting, someone who completed tasks without complaint but offered no social value beyond functional cooperation. Instructors recognized him only through the evidence of his work. Professor Sarah Martinez, who taught Business Statistics 201, would later testify during the casino investigation that she could recall Ryan Keller only because of a single interaction. He had stayed after class one evening to ask about the application of regression analysis to time series behavioral data in institutional settings. The question was specific enough to suggest genuine comprehension of advanced concepts, but Professor Martinez couldn't remember his face, couldn't recall his voice, could only summon the image of neatly organized notes he had been reviewing while waiting for other students to leave. He was like a ghost who turned in excellent homework, she told investigators, present but not really there. Ryan lived 17 minutes from campus in a studio apartment occupying 380 square feet of a 3-story building that housed mostly single working adults, divorced men navigating custody arrangements, and elderly tenants on fixed incomes. The building had been constructed in 1987 and showed every year of its age. Water-stained ceiling tiles, fluorescent hallway lighting that hummed at a frequency just below conscious irritation, a perpetual smell of old cooking oil and industrial carpet cleaner. His apartment was furnished entirely from estate sales, a fact he viewed as neither shameful nor particularly noteworthy. The desk, solid oak, purchased for $35 from the estate of a retired accountant, was scarred with decades of use but structurally sound. The bed frame, metal construction, $15 from a widower downsizing to assisted living, required assembly with a screwdriver and 20 minutes of his time. The bookshelf, particle board with veneer peeling at the corners, $8 from a graduate student who had abandoned academic ambitions for a sales position in Phoenix, held his textbooks, library books, and a laptop. His only new purchase was a single-burner electric hot plate, acquired for $22 after the apartment's original electric range had failed, and the landlord had declined to repair it. Citing the minimal rent and the availability of replacement apartments should Ryan find the situation unacceptable. His refrigerator contained meal prep containers purchased in bulk, each labeled with day designations written in permanent marker, Mon 1, Mon 2, TUE1, TUE2, and so forth. Every Sunday evening between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m., Ryan prepared 14 meals for the following week, each containing precisely calculated portions, designed to deliver 100 calories daily while minimizing grocery expenditure. The meals never varied. Chicken breast purchased in family packs went on sale for $1.99 per pound. Rice bought in 20-pound bags at warehouse stores. Frozen mixed vegetables from discount grocery outlets that sold items approaching expiration dates. Every meal cost $2.73 to produce. He had determined this was the optimal intersection of nutritional adequacy and financial efficiency for his situation. He consumed the same breakfast every morning, oatmeal prepared with water, a banana, and instant coffee. Total cost, 0.60. He ate lunch at exactly 11:30 a.m. during his warehouse shift. A sandwich made from bread that was discounted for approaching its sell-by date, peanut butter purchased in institutional-sized containers, and an apple. Total cost, $0.89. Variety, he had concluded, was expensive and introduced decision fatigue. His body required fuel. This system provided fuel efficiently. He worked at Med Supply Solutions, a regional medical equipment distributor occupying a warehouse complex near the airport. His official title was Logistics Associate 2, which meant he spent 32 hours per week loading delivery trucks, processing inventory and computer systems, and scanning barcodes on equipment ranging from disposable supplies to diagnostic machines worth more than his annual income. His shift ran 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., Tuesday through Saturday. The schedule was inflexible, established by the logistics manager who believed weekday coverage plus Saturday was optimal for processing Monday orders and Friday rushes before the weekend slowdown. The work was physical but not cognitively demanding, heavy enough to maintain functional strength, repetitive enough that Ryan could perform tasks while thinking about other things. He used his warehouse hours to mentally rehearse course material, review concepts from textbooks he kept in his car, and process observations from the previous evening. His coworkers viewed him as quiet but competent, the kind of employee who never complained, never called in sick, never created interpersonal drama. He arrived exactly on time, worked steadily through his shift, took his lunch break alone in his car, and left when his scheduled hours concluded. His supervisor, Kevin Matthews, would later tell casino investigators that Ryan Keller was one of those guys you forget is there until you check the productivity reports and realize he's getting more done than people who've been here 5 years. Ryan's sleep schedule was fractured by necessity, optimized over 2 years of trial and error. He slept 4 hours after returning from evening classes, typically 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. He slept 3 hours before his warehouse shift, typically 3:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. He supplemented these core sleep periods with controlled rest during his 60-minute lunch break, where he would recline his car seat, set an alarm for 50 minutes, and fall into light sleep that his body had learned to enter and exit efficiently. Most medical professionals would have called this schedule catastrophic for long-term health. Ryan called it calibration. The human body was adaptable, especially when consistently subjected to the same patterns. His circadian rhythm had adjusted to expect rest in these specific windows. He no longer experienced the cognitive fog that most people suffered when waking outside normal hours. More importantly, he had trained himself to function during periods when most people's judgment was compromised. He could think clearly at 2 a.m. He could perform calculations at 3 a.m. He could maintain discipline and logical decision-making during hours when most human brains demanded sleep with increasing biological urgency. He didn't realize it yet, but this training, born from the financial necessity of working full-time while attending night school, would become his greatest advantage. Financial aid officers saw Ryan Keller as case file Nahur 847-3291K, a borrower who would likely take 6 to 8 years to complete a 2-year associate degree before probably defaulting on loans within 18 months of graduation. They processed his paperwork with the mechanical efficiency of people who reviewed 300 similar cases per month. Loan servicers sent automated reminders to an email address he checked once weekly, warnings about accruing interest and repayment schedules that began 6 months after graduation or withdrawal from enrollment. He archived these messages without reading them. The debt would become relevant eventually, but not today. His credit score hovered at 623, dragged down by 2 maxed-out student credit cards he was making minimum payments on, $25 monthly on a $1,200 balance from textbook purchases, $35 monthly on a $1,800 balance from a laptop he had purchased 2 years prior when his previous computer died 3 days before finals week. The interest rates were 23.99% and 26.99% respectively. He understood compound interest well enough to know he was effectively donating money to credit card companies, but he didn't have enough surplus income to pay down the principal meaningfully. The laptop still functioned, though it had developed a dead pixel in the upper right quadrant of the screen, and the battery no longer held charge for more than 47 minutes. He kept it perpetually plugged in and positioned his work to avoid documents crossing the dead pixel. Replacing it would cost money he didn't have for a problem that didn't prevent functionality. To everyone who encountered Ryan Keller in his daily existence, professors who reviewed his homework, classmates who were assigned to his project groups, co-workers who worked adjacent warehouse stations, the cashiers at the discount grocery outlet where he bought bulk rice, the landlord who collected his rent check on the first of every month, he was essentially invisible, forgettable, broke, tired. Just another person grinding through the exhausting mechanics of survival, trying to reach some distant point where stability might exist, where the calculus of constant scarcity might ease slightly, where he might achieve something approaching the baseline security that other people seem to occupy without conscious effort. None of them understood what they were actually looking at. They saw exhaustion. Ryan saw training. They saw severe limitation. Ryan saw parameters within which to optimize. They saw a dead-end life. Ryan saw a system he was learning to read with increasing clarity. And systems Ryan understood from his statistics coursework and his years of navigating institutional bureaucracies could be studied, analyzed, understood in terms of assumptions and design principles. And if you understood a system well enough, if you identified the behavioral assumptions embedded in its structure, you could potentially operate within it in ways its designers never anticipated. He just hadn't yet identified which system would prove worth exploiting. Ryan's introduction to the North Star Casino began with a conversation he wasn't supposed to remember. It was October, 11 months into his enrollment at Riverside Community College. He was assigned to a group project in Business Administration 215, Consumer Behavior Analysis. The assignment required analyzing a retail environment's psychological design and documenting how spatial layout, sensory elements, and operational procedures influence purchasing decisions. His group consisted of 3 other students, selected randomly by an online algorithm the professor used to prevent self-selection bias. Derek Chen was a 23-year-old working multiple part-time jobs while pursuing a business degree. Jennifer Santos was a 37-year-old retail manager, taking evening courses for career advancement. Marcus Williams was a 19-year-old who treated community college as extended high school and contributed minimally to group work. During their second meeting held at a campus coffee shop, Derek mentioned his weekend job at the North Star Casino. He had been working as a beverage server on the graveyard shift, delivering drinks to gamblers during overnight hours. "It's actually a perfect example of what we're studying," Derek said, scrolling through photos on his phone showing the casino's interior layout. "The whole place is engineered to manipulate behavior. No clocks, no windows, oxygen pumped into the ventilation system to keep people awake, carpets with busy patterns so you don't notice how much time has passed." Jennifer suggested using the casino as their project subject. Derek immediately rejected the idea. "Trust me, you don't want to spend time analyzing that place. It's depressing as hell. Everyone there looks like they've given up on life. Old people burning through Social Security checks, middle-aged guys who should be home with their families. And the overnight shift?" He shook his head. "It's like a zombie apocalypse, but sadder. Just people feeding slot machines at 4 a.m. with this blank expression." "What's the customer volume like overnight?" Ryan asked. It was the first question he had posed during the meeting. Derek looked up, slightly surprised that Ryan had spoken. "It's weird, actually. It's technically dead compared to evening hours. But there's this steady flow of people. Third shift workers on their breaks, regulars who apparently gamble every night, random desperate people. It's busy enough that you're constantly moving, but it's not crowded like prime time." "How long have you worked there?" 6 weeks. I'm about to quit, honestly. The tips are decent, but the atmosphere is soul-crushing. And the smoke, everything I own smells like cigarettes now. They settled on analyzing a shopping mall instead, a choice that required less emotional labor. Derek quit the casino job 3 weeks later, taking a daytime position at a coffee shop where he didn't have to witness people's lives falling apart in real time. Ryan didn't forget the conversation. Specifically, he didn't forget the phrase, dead but somehow busy, or the description of third-shift workers and regular players. There was something there, some pattern worth understanding. Not because he had any interest in gambling, but because the description suggested an environment operating under different rules than normal business hours. 3 weeks later, on a Friday night when his mind was alert despite the late hour, and he had completed his weekend coursework early, Ryan decided to observe the casino Derek had described. He entered the North Star at 1:47 a.m. The building occupied a sprawling complex off Interstate 94, positioned to draw customers from 3 surrounding cities. The exterior attempted luxury, columned entrance, expensive-looking signage, decorative landscaping lit by ground-level spotlights. But closer inspection revealed cost-cutting measures. The columns were facade, not structural. The marble-patterned tiles in the entryway were laminate. The brass fixtures on the doors were painted metal, already showing wear at high-touch points. Ryan pushed through the main entrance and was immediately struck by the sensory assault that Derek had described. The smell hit first, cigarette smoke mixing with industrial air freshener, and the specific scent of ventilation systems, circulating air breathed by hundreds of people. Then sound, slot machines producing constant chirps and musical tones, dealers announcing calls at blackjack and roulette tables, the ambient white noise of dozens of simultaneous conversations, announcements over PA systems promoting drink specials and upcoming entertainment. Then light, bright enough to eliminate shadows but diffused enough that sources were difficult to identify, creating an environment where time became untethered from external reference. No windows, no visible clocks, just constant illumination that made 2 a.m. feel identical to 2 p.m. But beneath the carefully engineered chaos, Ryan noticed differences from the casino atmosphere Derek had described from evening hours. He had passed by the North Star once during early evening months ago, observing the parking lot and entrance out of curiosity. That evening crowd had been visible through the windows. Older adults on bus tours, groups celebrating birthdays, couples treating gambling as date night entertainment. Now at nearly 2 a.m., the demographic was absent. The late-night population was smaller but more focused. Third-shift workers in uniforms, hospital scrubs, security company patches, convenience store polo shirts, sat at slot machines or blackjack tables with the concentrated attention of people on time breaks. Regulars moved between games with purposeful efficiency, people who had clearly identified preferred dealers or machines. Solo players occupied spaces with the 1,000-yard stare of individuals who had been there for unknowable hours. The atmosphere wasn't entertainment. It was something closer to medication. Ryan spent 90 minutes walking the floor systematically. He carried his backpack and a notebook ostensibly for a class project, actually for capturing observations. He didn't gamble, didn't even approach gaming tables closely, just observed patterns. He noted staffing. During evening hours, Derek had mentioned, there were multiple floor managers visible, moving between sections, watching games, occasionally intervening in player disputes or dealer errors. Now Ryan counted 2 managers, both stationed at elevated platforms near the center of the floor, primarily watching video feeds from overhead cameras rather than directly observing tables. Security personnel followed fixed patterns. 3 guards at entrance points checking IDs and monitoring for banned individuals. 2 walking predetermined paths through the gaming floor every 18 minutes. He timed 3 complete rotations to confirm the pattern. 1 positioned near the cashier cage. Their movements were protocol, not responsive to specific situations. He observed dealer behavior. They worked with mechanical efficiency, people performing tasks they had executed thousands of times. But he noticed the telltale signs of cognitive function during circadian low points. Slightly slower eye movements when assessing cards, fractional pauses before announcing totals, subtle variations in rhythm that wouldn't be visible to casual observers, but became obvious when tracked systematically. Most importantly, he observed player behavior that created distinct patterns. Third shift workers played with defined time constraints, checking watches frequently, making decisions rapidly, leaving abruptly when their 30-minute breaks concluded. Regulars exhibited system-based play, watching patterns, adjusting bet sizes based on previous outcomes, performing superstitious rituals before high-value wagers. Desperate players showed emotional volatility, celebrating small wins with disproportionate enthusiasm, responding to losses with visible frustration, making increasingly aggressive bets as their bankrolls diminished toward zero. Everyone was tired, players fighting exhaustion while convincing themselves one more hand might reverse their losses. Dealers maintaining professional focus despite every biological system demanding sleep. Floor managers and security operating on autopilot, following established protocols without the sharp attention they would bring during fully alert hours. An entire ecosystem operating in the gap between alertness and collapse. Ryan recognized something fundamental in that environment, something that connected to his own experience. He had spent 2 years studying, working, and functioning during hours when most people's brains were effectively offline. He had trained himself to think with clarity at 2 a.m. when others could barely maintain focus. He could perform mental calculations at 3 a.m. when others made basic arithmetic errors. He could maintain discipline and execute logical decision-making during hours when exhaustion was biologically demanding surrender to impulse or shutdown. His fractured sleep schedule, 4 hours after classes, 3 hours before work, supplemented by precisely timed car naps, had not just allowed him to survive his circumstances. It had calibrated his circadian rhythm to operate during periods when other people's judgment systematically failed. The casino at night wasn't chaotic. It was predictable. And for someone who had built his entire life around functioning in the margins of normal human operation, it felt like familiar territory. Before leaving at 3:17 a.m., Ryan made one more complete circuit of the floor, this time observing blackjack tables specifically. He had general knowledge of the game from probability discussions in his statistics course, expected value, house edge, the mathematical principles underlying different bet structures. But now he watched with different intent. He noted which tables had players making consistent, logical decisions versus emotional, reactive ones. Which dealers maintained steady, rhythmic pace versus those who rushed through hands or delayed unnecessarily. Which table positions seemed to attract players who clearly didn't understand basic strategy and were making decisions based on feeling rather than mathematics. At 3:23 a.m., he walked to his car, drove back to his apartment, slept for 3 hours, and worked his Saturday warehouse shift. He didn't plan to return to the casino. The visit had been observational, academic curiosity, nothing more. But over the following 3 weeks, he found himself returning mentally to what he had witnessed. Not gambling specifically, but the system, the institutional assumptions embedded in casino design, the behavioral traps engineered into every element of the environment. Casinos assumed players would be impulsive, emotional, inconsistent. They built their entire profit model around exploiting cognitive weaknesses that emerged during fatigue, intoxication, social pressure, or emotional desperation. But what would happen if someone entered that system with the opposite characteristics? What if someone treated gambling not as entertainment or desperate hope, but purely as a discipline problem? Someone who refused to deviate from predetermined parameters regardless of outcome? Someone who studied the system the way Ryan studied for exams, methodically, patiently, with complete emotional detachment from results? Ryan began developing a hypothesis. The casino's advantage wasn't purely mathematical. It was psychological. The house edge in games like blackjack was relatively small when played with optimal strategy, less than 1%. But casinos didn't profit from that mathematical edge alone. They profited from players who made emotional decisions, chased losses, played while impaired, stayed too long, bet impulsively, celebrated wins by increasing stakes, and responded to setbacks with irrational aggression. The behavioral edge was larger than the mathematical one, and behavioral edges could potentially be neutralized through preparation. He wasn't looking for a way to cheat. Card counting, collusion, marking cards, using devices. These were prohibited, detectable, and ultimately irrelevant to his interest. He was looking for something simpler, a way to operate within the existing rules while avoiding the psychological traps those rules were designed to exploit. It was a theoretical question, an intellectual exercise, until he decided to test the hypothesis. Ryan returned to the North Star Casino on a Wednesday night in February, 4 months after his initial observation visit. He brought $200 in cash, withdrawn from an ATM using a portion of his paycheck he had designated for this purpose. This represented his total experimental budget for the month. If he lost it, the experiment would pause until March. Before entering the casino, he had spent 2 weeks developing a framework. He had used library computers to research probability theory, bankroll management principles, and documented casino game mathematics. He read academic papers on gambling behavior, studies of cognitive biases in decision-making under uncertainty, and analyses of how environmental design influenced choice architecture. He wasn't looking for tricks or secrets. He was looking for confirmation that what he suspected was true. Casinos profited primarily from player behavior patterns rather than from pure mathematical edges. The research confirmed his hypothesis. When played optimally, blackjack offered the lowest house edge of standard casino games, approximately 0.5% with perfect basic strategy. But the average player didn't play perfect basic strategy. The average player made decisions based on intuition, superstition, emotion, and social pressure. The average player lost money not because mathematics was insurmountable, but because they couldn't maintain discipline. Ryan identified blackjack as the optimal game for his experiment, not because he believed he could beat it long-term through any magical system, but because it offered the clearest decision framework. Every hand had a mathematically optimal play based on the player's cards and the dealer's visible card. Charts existed documenting these optimal decisions. Following them didn't guarantee winning, but it minimized losses. More importantly, blackjack required maintaining discipline across many individual decisions. It was a test of consistency. He established rules before his first real session: time limit, 2 hours maximum per session, regardless of outcome. When 2 hours elapsed, he would leave immediately, even mid-hand if necessary. Loss limit, $200 total per session. If his bankroll reached zero, the session ended immediately. No ATM visits, no returning to his car for emergency funds, no rationalizations. Win limit, if he doubled his starting bankroll to $400, he would immediately stop, secure the original $200 as baseline, and continue playing only with the $200 profit, treating it as separate money. Decision protocol. Every play decision would follow basic strategy charts he had memorized. No deviations based on intuition, hunches, patterns, or advice from other players. No emotional responses to previous hands. Observation. Priority. Gathering data was the primary goal. Profit was secondary. Every session would be documented. Time spent, hands played, notable patterns observed, dealer behaviors, emotional states, adherence to protocols. That first Wednesday night, arriving at 11:43 p.m., Ryan approached a $10 minimum blackjack table. He bought in with his $200, received 20 chips, and began playing. He lost 140 in 90 minutes and left early. He returned the following Wednesday, lost $180 in 1 hour and 42 minutes. The pattern continued through February, March, and April. Ryan wasn't trying to win. He was calibrating. He was learning to recognize when fatigue was affecting his judgment, when the desire to deviate from basic strategy emerged, usually after losing several hands in sequence, when emotional pressure suggested that changing the pattern might reverse fortune. He documented these moments, noting the cognitive experience of wanting to break his rules while simultaneously refusing to do so. He was learning dealer behaviors. Some maintained absolute mechanical consistency, dealing cards with rhythmic precision, regardless of time or table dynamics. Others showed patterns of fatigue, dealing slightly faster when tired, making minor procedural errors that required correction, exhibiting tells in body language when the next card would be low or high value based on their unconscious reactions. He was learning to identify player types: emotional players who celebrated wins and mourned losses visibly, system players who increased bets based on perceived patterns, drunk players whose decision quality deteriorated progressively, Tourists playing for entertainment without understanding basic strategy. He was training himself to remain invisible. He dressed the same way he dressed for class and work. He never engaged in conversation beyond necessary responses to dealer questions. He never celebrated wins or showed frustration at losses. He tipped dealers modestly but consistently, $1 per hour, which was low enough to be unremarkable, but high enough to avoid being perceived as a problem. To security cameras and floor managers, Ryan looked like an unremarkable losing player with decent discipline. Someone who played conservatively, followed basic strategy reasonably well, never caused problems, and gradually lost money over time while maintaining a controlled approach. They flagged him as harmless, forgettable, which was exactly what Ryan needed. By May, after 3 months of documented sessions, Ryan had lost approximately $1,900 total, but he had gathered invaluable data. He had identified that his emotional impulse to deviate from strategy peaked between the 40-minute and 60-minute marks of sessions, when fatigue and frustration compounded. After 60 minutes, if he had maintained discipline through the danger zone, maintaining it became easier. He had documented which dealers exhibited the highest consistency and which showed patterns of exploitable fatigue or distraction. He had learned to recognize when table dynamics created statistical opportunities, not through any mystical system, but through player behavior that created favorable conditions for disciplined play. Most importantly, he had proven to himself that he could maintain his protocols even during losses, even during emotional pressure, even during exhaustion. The trap was visible now. The casino was designed to push players toward emotional decisions at every level. The free alcohol, the bright lights, the absence of time cues, the sound design that celebrated wins while muting losses, the social pressure at tables to play faster or more aggressively. Everything was engineering, and engineering could be countered with counter-engineering. In June, Ryan made one adjustment to his system. He would arrive between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., targeting the period when overnight staff were most recently rotated in, and when player population was lowest, reducing variance from other players' emotional decisions affecting table dynamics. His results began to shift. Not dramatically, not in ways that would trigger attention, just gradual improvement in outcomes. A session where he left up $40 instead of down $80. A night where he broke exactly even across 2 hours. An evening where he hit his win limit target of doubling his money and walked away after 73 minutes, securing his discipline by refusing to stay while he was hot. The casino's internal tracking systems monitored his play but found nothing concerning. His betting patterns were conservative and consistent. His win-loss ratio was marginally better than average, but well within normal variance ranges. He looked like a disciplined recreational player who understood basic strategy and happened to be slightly lucky over a small sample size. There was no reason to watch him closely. By September, 6 months into his experiment, Ryan had documented something that the research papers had suggested, but that he needed to prove empirically. Consistent disciplined play over extended time could produce results that, while not statistically impossible, deviated significantly from expected outcomes for average players. He had turned his accumulated $1,900 in losses into a net position of $200 profit. Not because he had discovered any secret, not because he had cheated, but because he had refused to play the psychological game the casino expected. He had turned gambling into an exam. He knew the material, he knew the format, he knew his limits. All he had to do was execute without emotional deviation, and he was about to scale the approach in ways that would challenge every assumption the North Star Casino made about player behavior. By October, Ryan had been playing consistently for 8 months. His documented profit stood at $8,200, accumulated across 127 individual sessions. He had never deviated from his core protocols, fixed time limits, predetermined loss and win thresholds. Absolute adherence to basic strategy, emotional detachment from outcomes. The casino's tracking systems showed him as a regular player with slightly above average results. His player profile indicated someone who understood the games, played conservatively, and maintained consistent patterns. Security reviews found nothing suspicious. No bet variation suggesting card counting, No interaction with dealers beyond necessary communication, no device usage, no collaboration with other players. He was exactly the kind of player casinos appreciated, disciplined enough to keep returning, not successful enough to pose a threat. Ryan recognized he had reached an inflection point. His system worked, validated across hundreds of hours of play. The question was whether it could scale. Traditional bankroll management theory suggested that as capital increased, exposure per session should increase proportionally to maintain the same risk-reward ratio. If he continued playing with $200 starting bankrolls, he was essentially capping his potential returns. But if he increased stakes while maintaining identical discipline, he could potentially accelerate results without increasing actual risk. The key variable was his own psychology. Could he maintain the same discipline when playing with $1,000 per session instead of $200? Would larger wins or losses trigger emotional responses that compromised his system? He decided to test this gradually. In November, he increased his starting bankroll to $500 per session. Same rules, same time limits, same decision protocols, just larger absolute numbers. The first session at this level triggered exactly the emotional response he had anticipated. Hands that previously represented $20 losses now represented $50 losses. His body's stress response increased even though the mathematical relationship was identical. He documented this carefully, noting the physical sensation of elevated heart rate, the intrusive thoughts suggesting he should, just this once, deviate from strategy to recover losses faster. He didn't deviate. The session ended with a $200 loss, larger in absolute terms than his previous baseline, identical in percentage terms. He continued at the $500 level through November, documenting his psychological adaptation. By the fourth session, the stress response had diminished significantly. By the eighth session, it was negligible. His nervous system had calibrated to the new baseline. December results, $7,300 total bankroll. In January, he increased to $1,000 per session. Again, his body reacted initially. A single loss hand represented $100, more than his weekly grocery budget. But the psychological adaptation came faster this time. His nervous system understood the pattern. The absolute numbers didn't matter. Only adherence to the system mattered. February results, $31,200 total bankroll. March, 58 years at $900. Ryan changed nothing visible about his external life. He continued attending the same community college classes, working the same warehouse shifts, living in the same studio apartment, eating the same meal-prepped food. His Honda Civic still had the cracked windshield. His backpack still held together with duct tape. His landlord had no idea that the quiet tenant in 3C had accumulated nearly $60,000 through disciplined exploitation of casino psychology. He began arriving at the North Star 6 nights per week instead of 3, maintaining the same per session discipline but increasing frequency. His total monthly hours of play increased from approximately 24 hours to 48 hours. The results compounded. Not because he was getting luckier, not because he was improving his strategy, he had memorized optimal play months ago, but because he was executing a proven system with increased frequency and capital exposure while maintaining absolute consistency. By June, his bankroll had reached $347,000. The casino systems noted his increased play and larger betting patterns but found no red flags. His decision quality remained consistent. His behavior stayed predictable. His win rate, while favorable, fell within possible variance ranges for someone playing solid basic strategy over his documented volume of play. Senior analysts reviewed his player profile quarterly. Each review concluded the same way. Skilled, recreational player, slightly lucky, no evidence of prohibited activity. They missed what was actually happening because it didn't fit their pattern recognition systems. They were monitoring for advantage play techniques, card counting, shuffle tracking, collusion. They weren't monitoring for someone who simply refused to play the emotional game that made casinos profitable. By September, 14 months into his systematic play, Ryan's bankroll exceeded $1.2 million. He had withdrawn nothing. The money existed in his designated bankroll account, completely separate from his operational finances. He lived on his warehouse income and student loans, maintaining the same lifestyle he had established years earlier. His classmates had no idea. His coworkers had no idea. His professors had no idea. Professor Martinez would give him a B+ in advanced statistics that semester, noting on his final report card, "Solid work throughout, would benefit from more class participation." If she had known how Ryan was applying regression analysis and probability theory to casino behavioral patterns, she might have been more impressed. By October of his second year, Ryan knew he was nearing a limit, not mathematical but practical. His bankroll had grown to $2.8 million over 21 months of flawless discipline. He understood overnight casino dynamics better than most staff: dealer fatigue, player behavior, emotional traps. He never deviated, never chased, never celebrated, but seven-figure wins attract attention. Eventually, compliance systems would look closer, not because he cheated, but because quiet consistency at that scale invites scrutiny. So Ryan initiated his final phase. For 3 months, he compressed time and increased scale. 6 sessions per week, $10,000 starting bankroll per session, 90-minute maximum, 70% loss limit, 40% win trigger, use immediate exit, perfect basic strategy, zero emotion, target, $45 million, then disappear. September, 2.8 million, 7.4 million. October, 7.4 million, 18.9 million. Mid-November, 18.9 million, 38.2 million. Nothing about his behavior changed. Same clothes, same backpack, same quiet presence. The numbers climbed. The system stayed silent. On November 17th at 2:47 a.m., Ryan entered North Star Casino with $43.7 million total bankroll. He bought in for $50,000, played 83 minutes, won $87,000, cashed out immediately. He went home, slept 4 hours, worked his warehouse shift. 3 nights later, he returned. November 20th, 3:11 a.m. Ryan sat at the same blackjack table, same buy-in, same silence. The cards ran slightly favorable, nothing unusual, 71 minutes, 47 hands, $92,000. He cashed out again. Over the next few weeks, he played sparingly, small discipline gains. On December 13th, after a final 68-minute session, his balance crossed $44 million. Then he executed the final step. A full withdrawal request, $45,000. The transaction required managerial approval. The night manager reviewed his history, 23 months, 1,147 sessions. No red flags, no devices, no collusion, no bet variation. At 3:16 a.m., approval was granted. Ryan walked out at 3:34 a.m. He slept, went to work, attended class. Nobody noticed.